So yeah, I'll do a bit of a presentation to start with, and yeah, but as we say, as we go along, if you want to ask questions, then do so, and yeah, and I'll try and get through it fairly quickly so we can talk a bit more generally. So this kind of came out of an article that I've written, which is about COVID-19, coronavirus, and then career guidance and social justice. So I'm going to sort of try and give you a bit of a flavour of what we were talking about in that article, and then we can go wherever we want really from there. So right, so there we go. So this is a lyric here from Tanita Tikaram, which popped into my head because I think I'm quite used to watching the news and feeling things are terrible somewhere in the world and not really feeling that that's going to have a big impact on me personally. Oh, there's a strange noise there. Is that okay? So, and so in January we started to see this stuff in Wuhan, in China, saying that there were these big, this new disease and all these bad things that were happening. And I think probably most of us, took it seriously in the sense that we thought it was bad that this was happening to other people, but I don't think we probably thought it was going to happen to us. And so then over the next few months, it's been just a dramatic shift, and so I think somebody's got their microphone on, so it's like feeding back. But
yeah, I'm just going to check
anyway.
that we've got no more things slowing down the power of the reception here, and I'm looking through. Everybody does appear to be muted, so continue, Christian, the best you can, and I'll just see if I can resolve anything here.
Okay, all right. So over the last few months, we've just seen the number of cases go completely crazy, and so this is a summary of the number of cases. So the red line is really the one that you have to look at, which is how cases have shifted across the world, and we're now up well over 2 million, aren't we, in terms of the number of cases. It's just been a phenomenal few months, the strangest period I think of my life. And so my life is now really, really different to how it used to be. And I used to be spending a lot of time traveling around and going and doing presentations and talking to various people, going to meetings, all those things that we used to do. And it's, now I spend my time, so the brick wall is what I can see out my window right now. I've now put some plants in front of it. So I've got quite into growing plants and things, but I now spend my time, the few times I do go out, I have to wear a mask. We've got our thermometer to check our temperature. And so we're all kind of, I think about the coronavirus all the time. It's really filling my life. And that's been quite a big shift in my life. So this kind of big shock. So I've been working a lot with these two people, which is Ronald Sultana and Rhea Thompson, who I'm sure you're probably aware of. I know Ronald's sort of done this kind of presentation as well. And we have worked together over a number of years, and actually we were just meeting to talk about, are we going to do anything else together? Because we'd sort of done these two big book projects, which I'll talk about in a second, and we'd kind of got a bit exhausted, and the sort of energy had gone out of that. And that's now sort of about a year ago that finished, and we kind of got together to have a chat and say, well, what are we going to do next? And it was just in the middle of all this, and we just talked about the virus all the time. That was all we could really talk about. And so we said, well, look, let's try and do something about that. So we wrote an article which is on our website, which is called Career Guidance for Social Justice. And it's called Why a Social Justice Informed Approach to Career Guidance Matters in the Time of Coronavirus. And I think most of you have seen that. And I'm just going to go through a few bits about that, but then we'll kind of talk about what you made of it, really. So I suppose before we get onto that, there's a bit of background, which is that I think what's happening now happens in the context of, firstly, a very successful period for the kind of global economy, a very successful period for capitalism, what we often in our writing often describe as neoliberalism, but which ran up to about 2007, 2008, 2009, when we had the global crash. So really before that, it became really from the end of the Berlin Wall through to 2008, it became very difficult to talk about alternatives to the way things were. So, you know, there were various things that were sort of assumed ideas about how things should work. So globalization, the market, the sort of what's often described as sort of rolling back the state, so moving away from public services towards more individual responsibility. These were sort of assumptions that that were happening and made sense, and while not everyone agreed with them, they really, you know, they ran the show, and they ran the show in both kind of left-wing political parties and right-wing political parties, really. And so from 2008, things started to change, and really that's where some of the work that I've been doing with Ronald and Rhea comes in, is that you start to think, well, maybe everything's not going quite as well as we thought. And so perhaps some of the career theories that we've been working with aren't really delivering for us in this sort of period where perhaps we're not so happy with the way the global economy is going. Everything's just not getting better and better all the time. And so there's a nice piece from Prelitensky and Stead, who say that career theories traditionally emphasize self-development, self-improvement, self-efficacy, self-creation and self-regulation, all hallmarks of a society's valuing individualism as ways to make optimal career choices. And they seldom consider how the working world may be restructured from ethical and social justice perspectives to the benefits of workers. And that focus on the individual actually is a lot more appealing to people in a period when the economy is going really well. So if everybody's getting a bit better off every year, or at least if the majority of people are, then you can believe this idea that, well, if I work hard and if I study hard and I make good career choices, then everything's going to go well for me. And so the focus should be on the individual, on the self. And so you get these ideas like life design, that you can design your life and make it the way you want, and so on. So we started to say, well, we think that's probably not going to cut it anymore. And so we started to try and think, well, where does career guidance fit? If career guidance is not just about telling people to kind of be better, stronger, faster, beat everyone else around them, take control of their life and so on, what is it about? And so we came up with a definition in this book, the Career Guidance for Social Justice book. And we said, oh, hold on, let me see if I can move this so I can actually read the quote. We said that career guidance is about supporting both individuals and groups. And we said it's about discovering more about work, leisure and learning, and considering their place in the world and planning for their future. And we say that it supports individuals and groups to consider and reconsider work, leisure and learning in the light of new information and experiences, and to take both individual and collective action as a result of this. So what we're trying to do here is to say, well, career is much bigger than just work. It's not just about paid work, it's about learning, but it's also about citizenship, leisure, how you fit into the world. And it's not only about what you do, so it's not only this sort of self stuff that Prelitensky talks about, the self-improvement, the self-creation and so on, but it's also about how you work with other people to make your life and the world in general better. So that's our kind of our argument, really. And we did these two books. We did Career Guidance for Social Justice and Career Guidance for Emancipation. And, you know, they're out, they're kind of academic books, but it might be of interest to people. And we've also created a website, where we're trying to take some of these ideas and talk about them more. And that's something that is one of the kind of projects that I'm quite committed to, and I'd really be interested to hear from people who would like to get involved in that. So we're looking for people who these ideas resonate with, who would like to support us by writing for that site, talking about the practices that they're doing, and I suppose helping us to translate some of these kind of academic, theoretical arguments into actual practice that we can do in career guidance. Now, I've got some ideas about how that works, but there's definitely a lot of room for a lot more of that. And so we're trying to encourage more people to get involved with this. And all of this has been happening in a very confusing time, I think, for all of us. And so we've got all sorts of things going on in this slide. We've got, Mr. Trump there, but also Greta Thunberg. And so when people, we would say that overall, we've seen a shift in political discourse to the right over the last few years, but we've also seen a sort of renewed challenge to that: progressive left, environmentalism, feminism, all sorts of things going on as well. So it's really confusing what's going on in politics. Brexit is something that none of us probably predicted. It's really very strange. But then you've got things like the Australian wildfires going on. So I wrote an article at round about Christmas when I was reflecting on last year, and I said, last year, 2019, strangest year I've ever lived through. All these weird things happening. It's so difficult. Surely things are gonna now. We get into the end of Brexit. Maybe things are going to go back to normal. But I was obviously massively wrong. So in comes the coronavirus as a thing which none of us predicted, and this is. And what we've really tried to do in this article is think about how does the virus actually reframe some of our thinking about the importance of career guidance and the kind of approaches that we're suggesting that should be used in it. So one of the things that we've tried to argue in that article is that this isn't just completely random. So this quote from Nita Madoff, who's a pandemic specialist, she says, well, the likelihood of pandemics has increased over the past century because of increased global travel and integration, urbanization, changes in land use, and greater exploitation of the natural environment. So the point is not to say that anybody, some evil neoliberal figure is sitting in a castle somewhere planning out the coronavirus. That's not what we're saying at all. But what we're saying is the kind of world that's emerged in the 21st century is sort of ripe for this kind of thing. So it's not just that this could have happened at any time. It happened now, and it happened now for a reason. And it wasn't because anyone planned it, but there's certain things that we've done in the world have made things like the coronavirus more likely. We've created a world which is susceptible to pandemic. So environmental destruction is undoubtedly a contributing feature, the raising of global temperature, globalization and unfettered movement of at least some people. Now, other people find it much more difficult to move. But then also a set of political changes around the rolling back of the state and the loss of public and state capacity. So we talk in the article about how if we look back in history, when we had similar things, governments kind of knew how to deal with crises. But in the period that we're in at the moment, certainly many governments, and you can see it really in the States at the moment, you can see it in Britain, where we've really given up on lots of the ideas of the state, that we really just don't know what to do. And so, I mean, it's been really heartening to see in New Zealand how your government has actually, taken a very active role. But lots of governments felt that kind of active role was just illegitimate for them, and that the state shouldn't be playing that kind of role. And so in Britain, we had this sort of initial idea that it was a kind of market idea, which is, well, let the disease just run riot. The strongest will survive. And I don't think it's, completely crazy to see a link between that kind of rhetoric, which says what was called the herd immunity. So the idea that, well, we'll just let the strongest people survive and then we'll all be better off. that has a link to some of the ways in which career theories have thought about the labour market. So we've had this kind of idea that career theory is encouraging us to be stronger, better, faster, and that ultimately that will help the most effective people to do well, and the labour market and society as a whole will do better out of that. So we've obviously got some problems with that. And looking forward, we also think that COVID-19 is going to change the political economy. So in the short to medium term, we've seen this lockdown that we're all under at the moment, which is a kind of mothballing of the economy. So nothing much happens. And really, nobody's ever done anything like this before. So this is a really kind of strange period. But longer term, pretty much every economic commentator is saying, look, there's going to be some pretty long-term recession implications. You can't just shut everything down for months and months and then hope that it'll all be all right. So in Britain, you know, we're going to probably end up with the lockdown going on for 2 or 3 months, probably quite reduced economic activity after that. Well, what happens? You know, many firms that have closed their doors a month and a half ago won't probably reopen their doors again because they would have gone out of business. There'll be a big shift in the economy, and that's going to have a big impact in the labour market. And we've seen that in many countries. But so in my country, we've seen just a massive increase in unemployment, a massive increase in the number of people claiming benefits, a massive reduction in the number of new jobs being advertised, and so on. And this sort of situation might not go away because the pandemic is not just going to disappear. We might get better at managing it, but it's not just going to disappear. And so it then raises this question: is this the new normal? What is in fact the new normal? And that's something that I think we want to think about quite a bit. So this is what we wrote in our article. We said, oh, sorry, I need to move this so I can read it again. The pandemic served to give a knockout blow to stable conceptions of the nature of work, leisure, family life, and society. Much of the advice that we might have given about how to build a successful career can be simply cast aside. In a world where going into the office, networking, and attending an interview are all things of the past, career guidance needs to radically and quickly reform its messages. And that's that's basically the center of the argument, is that things are changing and they're changing very quickly, and career guidance needs to think about how it deals with that. So, but our argument is that career guidance remains really critical, because if work is disappearing, jobs are going as a result of this, if work is changing as a result of this, if our work-life balance is shifting, if some transitions, and the one that I've been worrying about most has been the transition that young people are going to make from school or university into the labour market, which I think is going to be very, very difficult this year. And I think there's a really big danger that many of the people who traditionally we would have been helping as career guidance professionals are really going to struggle, because they'll be competing with they'll be kind of graduating into a recession labour market, but they'll also be competing with lots of other people who've been made unemployed, and with a kind of just a general downturn in recruitment. So what's going to happen to all of those young people? Well, they definitely need career guidance, but is career guidance going to be enough? Probably not on its own. So many people, transitions are going to become difficult, particularly for young people. Many people are going to have to make some big career shifts over the next few years. Some of the industry, the way that the economy works is probably going to change. But people are going to need help to deal with those things. And so career guidance should be absolutely critical to this. It should be really at the heart of helping people to deal with all of this stuff. And yet in many countries, there's not a lot of recognition of this. So my argument, or one part of the argument that we've been making, is that career guidance has to be part of reconstruction strategies. So economies are going to have to be rebuilt in the aftermath the COVID-19 period, labour markets are going to have to be rebuilt. We're going to have to reforge relationships between education, employment, and so on, because the economy is going to shift. And career guidance is absolutely ideal for that. And what we've seen, even in countries like Britain, where the management of the crisis has not been particularly effective, we've seen substantial, government action, really coordinated government action around health issues. And that's been, it's been very good. It's been entirely necessary, but it's been good to see. I think we're going to need equally fundamental government coordination around work and the labour market. How are we going to get the labour market going again? And if we're thinking about how we get the labour market going again, we need to put career guidance right at the centre of that. So that's a kind of one thing that I think we should definitely be arguing with anyone who we can argue it to, is that career guidance has to be part of a reconstruction strategy. Well, firstly, that countries are going to need a labour market and economic reconstruction strategy. And secondly, that career guidance has to be part of this. So what have we learned from this as a profession? Well, the first thing I think is that digital guidance, which people have, I've been writing about digital guidance for a long while, and people have been kind of, tiptoeing around the edge of it. But I think we have to accept that for our profession, digital guidance, doing things online, has to be a core competency. It can't be a specialism that some people can do. It can't be an option. It has to be something that we're able to do, all of us are able to do, and we have understandings of different mechanisms through which to do it. Because what this kind of period shows us is that some of the assumptions that we have about how societies work and about how our profession works can fall away very quickly. And if we're not flexible and not able to do kind of multiple forms of practice, then we are likely to have, we'll make ourselves irrelevant. The second thing I think we've learned is that the basic promise of career guidance, that we can offer people a better life, might not be true at the moment. And that is a big deal. And we need to make it, think about how we kind of deal with that. Is that many people may be coming to us looking for a better life, and the labour market and economic situation is not going to enable us to help them. What we can do is help them to preserve some of their life. We can help them to mitigate the worst effects of a recession and so on, but we can't always offer them a better life. So that's a big shift. And I think the other thing that we've learned really from this period is that your prospects for a better life, in fact, even for life itself, even to be able to survive, are bound up with other people and how they behave. So Ronald uses this phrase that lockdown is a pedagogic moment. So it gives us a chance to think. I started off this presentation saying, well, my life has really changed. It's completely different to how it was. I'm sitting in my home, but that gives me a chance to think. And I think one of the things is that in such a situation where people are having a fundamental transformation of their lives, our role as careers workers is to help people to see that there are a range of different personal and political solutions to the crisis. And we need to help them to think these things through and think about who benefits from each of these different solutions. And that comes back to this idea of what is the new normal? Is the plan just to go back to what we wanted, how we were before? Is that our ultimate aim, or could we go somewhere different? So in our book, Career Guidance for Emancipation, we identified what we call 5 signposts towards a socially just career guidance. And I've been working with these quite a lot. And I think they're really helpful. They're not a kind of complete method for career guidance, but what they do is give you some things to think about while you're doing career guidance that helps you to operationalize some of the sort of things that I've been talking about. So just to quickly go through those, what do we mean? Oh, let's go back here. So the first thing of our signposts is that when you're doing career guidance for people, you should be doing what we call building critical consciousness. So helping people to understand the situation, not just to react to it, And I think that's really important at the moment, is that people don't just want to, you know, figure out what job to get. They also want to figure out how they're going to manage, you know, what is going on in the world. How do they fit into it? The second thing is that we should name oppression. And we think that this period of sort of crisis is going to work well for some. Some people are going to benefit out of it, but many people are not going to be benefiting out of it. And we need to particularly understand who those people are and help those people. Third thing is that we really want to question what's normal. I think it's really important that this idea of spending time with people discussing what does a return to normal mean? What should the new normal look like? That's a really fruitful area of discussion in career guidance at the moment. Then our fourth thing is to encourage people to work together. It's not just about being an individual. As we've seen in the pandemic, coming together is an important part of helping people to have a better life. And we really want to facilitate people to work together more effectively going forwards and support each other in their career. And then finally, we make the point that career guidance is not just something that happens between a professional and an individual. It's something which also happens when you advocate for that person, or when you argue for that the systems need to change, or when you bring people together in groups. So career guidance has to operate at a number of different levels. And at the moment, there's likely to be real big requirements for change to systems, because the systems that we have are not really fit for purpose and not suitable for what we're likely to face. So I'm going to finish there. So really just asking, does any of this make sense? It's not, as I've sort of started with, it's not a kind of finished set of thoughts. It was our attempt to theorize what was going on a little bit, to try and understand it, to try and think about what the role of career guidance might be within it. And there's more information about me and so on there, but I'm happy to take questions or just to hear what people think. And yeah, let's see where we go from there.
Thanks so much, Tristram. Jenny's got her hand up, so we'll go first to her. Unmute yourself, Jenny.
I was just moving my screen so I could see it better, actually. But I could ask a question since it's potentially science. Thanks so much, Tristram. It's really fantastic that you were able to outline the paper. I read it earlier this afternoon, so thanks so much for that. I love that there are people putting some deep thought into this, and I do enjoy your posts. The question I asked, and it's possibly slightly controversial, didn't mean it to be the very first question that was asked, but I also read, you've probably been expecting this, I also read John McCarthy's response, which was rather lengthy. I'm hoping other people read that as well, but in a way he just took a very long time to say. He thought that yours, the focus was very much first world, and perhaps didn't consider the fact that the rest of the world was suffering and that none of this neoliberalism makes much sense. I'm just wondering what your response would be to his very long diatribe.
Yeah, I mean, John's not very convinced. I mean, not very convinced by what we're saying, which is fair enough, obviously. I mean, I know John very well, but so, I mean, like the specific point about this being a first world thing, I don't think is right, because to me, neoliberalism, one of the reasons why we use that phrase, rather than like Thatcherism or Blairism or, you know, whatever it might be, is that the idea of neoliberalism is the idea that there is a global system of political economy, and that in that global system there are winners and losers, and that, so what that means is that you can be sitting, as Ria does, in, you know, one of the best countries in the world, in Denmark, as somewhere that always comes out top of almost every ranking. But you can also recognize that while you're doing that, it's not just because you're so clever because you're Danish, it's also because your standard of living is built on the standard of living of other people across the world. So I think one of the things that we have tried to do in our books as well is to evolve voices from the global south. And it's not that easy, actually, to find people, but we have contributions in our book from India, from Brazil, from a number of other places, and we've tried to move outside the normal kind of set of English-speaking and European countries that talk about career guidance. But yeah, so I mean, I don't think that's fair. But and I think one of the things that we're seeing some changes in the way the world is working. We might be seeing some shifts in power and which countries are the most powerful. And I think one of the things that's really undermined a lot of European countries' response is that assumption that, you know, all the bad things happen far away and that somehow we're more developed. And then you see that, you know, China, Korea, and so on have dealt with these issues much more effectively than many European countries. And so I think this is a global system. I think we need to talk about it as a global system. And what I think is true is that sometimes some of the stuff that I've been reading, which is about career and work, does kind of view the lockdown as a period of sort of quiet contemplation for people to think about the what's really important to themselves. And that is very much a kind of privilege.
Well, it is privilege for those lucky people that are able to sit and contemplate that aren't. Yeah.
And I'm in that position, but I also recognise that people around me are in a position, and not just in other countries, but in Britain as well, where the loss of their income is a kind of life or death matter. So we have to be kind of careful, because it is operating on a number of different levels. For some people, it's a kind of existential reflection on how your life used to be. For others, it's a kind of brutal fight for survival. But the argument that therefore things need to change, I think, still holds true for both.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And regardless of what John's comments might be around the fact that, you know, let's not go crazy, as all this other stuff happening in the world, it doesn't negate the fact that this stuff is happening and it's affecting all of us. And there is potentially a global conversation to be had. So I love that you're opening that. I love that you are open to coming and talking to us about it. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Tristram. Lauren.
Yeah. Any other questions? I haven't seen anything come through on the chat, so feel free just to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Otherwise, I have some pre-prepared questions of my own. Did you have something, Catherine?
You need to unmute yourself, Catherine. Catherine, bottom left, you're mute.
Not sure if she did want to speak. I saw her unmute briefly. I think one of your recommendations when reading the paper was for governments to invest in career development, as you said, to be at the heart of the reframing and restructuring. I'm also conscious, though, certainly within our country, we have quite a small workforce of career development. And where would you think would be a good place for them to start to have real impact with the professionals that we do have in this space?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the profession, I think the profession is going to have to, you know, there's going to be a difficult period of trying to pick itself up and figure out what is possible, and a lot of that will depend on how the practicalities of the lockdown happen. And this is why I made that point about digital guidance being central. Really, is that it's possible that our lockdown, you know, that we get let out of lockdown, but that people are still not, we're not encouraged to bring people together into large groups. So things like careers fairs that we run quite a lot in our country might become impossible. It may be that universities aren't doing lectures anymore, and so a whole set of forms of practice that we had around teaching and learning might be challenged by that. It may be that people don't want to come and sit in a little room with a careers professional right opposite them because they're frightened of catching a disease. So this is where I think, you know, there's a set of thinking which is both about the process of what we do and how we do it, and about the kind of messages and types of thinking that we're encouraging people to do. So I think that's what the profession needs to be doing. But it also needs to be making the argument to government, you know, and I've tried to frame it as this kind of, we need some sort of reconstruction plan, and that part of that needs to focus on the labour market, and that needs to and part of that needs to be about helping people to manage these changes that are happening to them. And that's where career guidance comes in, is in helping people to manage these changes. And I think we need to be making that argument to government really quite strongly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We're getting some questions through the chat now. Jean, did you want to speak to your first post there?
It wasn't me.
Oh, I've got a message here from a blog from Jean.
I think
I'm
it's Jean
sorry, yeah,
Otley.
that's me, Jean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jenny.
Yeah, just thinking about the precariousness of work for some people, and thinking about the New Zealand situation where our borders are closed now. So the people who are here now, and that's our future workforce. That's who we're working with, and I work with skilled migrants who came in under a government policy, an immigration policy, where we opened the doors to people from around the world, and now they're here. The borders are closed; they can't go back, and the bias that was evident before lockdown, when we come out of it, will be even. It will still be there, and perhaps even more pronounced. So I'm thinking, just personally from the work I do, of our vulnerable people not being across the range of all of our population here in New Zealand. That's not a question; it's a comment. But yes.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, so one of the things that we tried to talk about in the article briefly was this idea that this is going to reshape the idea of sort of oppression, disadvantage, vulnerability. So there are groups who you wouldn't have said were necessarily or weren't at the top of people's minds as being oppressed or having very difficult lives. And people with certain health conditions, for example. I mean, so my kids' school, when we sort of moved into the first phase of lockdown, where they just said, well, look, if you're immunocompromised, then that you can't go into work. And at that point, the school could no longer function because there were so many people like that who weren't apparent, they weren't visibly disabled, but they had health issues that meant that they weren't able to work in this situation. So how is that going to play out? So that's one big issue, definitely, is that we're seeing a reshaping of this idea of vulnerability. But this other point about the migrants is really important, is that there are lots of people, President Trump, probably the most important of them, who are trying to kind of rationalize and nationalize COVID-19, which is a nonsense, really, isn't it? I mean, because, this idea that it was we've all had it. It's gone right across the world. It's no respecter of race or national borders. But absolutely, there will be people who will be trying to say, this is the Chinese fault, or this is migrants' fault, or whatever. And we really have to try and, I think, counter those messages. And I think it is very possible that this does result in the weakening of the labour market position of migrants, and that is a worrying thing, and that is something which those people who work in career guidance with migrants should really think about, how they support those migrants better.
Thank you. We've got a question come through on the chat here, asking, I'd be interested in Tristram's solutions around issues for young people entering the labour market. Can you give us some of your ideas there?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and particularly, I mean, so some of these things might be quite specific because they matter, but what the context matters particularly a lot. And what we've seen in Britain is, very substantially growing unemployment, and we know that employers are reducing the number of of young people that they're planning, entry-level staff they're planning to take on. They've already told us that. So what worries me is that young people who are leaving school and university this year, they will graduate in the middle of lockdown, so they will have a very weird experience of finishing their education. They will then potentially, if they are lucky enough to get a job, they might begin that job as a home worker or in lockdown. So that's going to be very strange, and that's going to be something which is going to put employers off taking on entry-level staff. So there's a whole set of problems. So what do I think we can do about that? Well, I think there are a number of things. So I've been trying to kind of sketch out a bit of a platform that we can argue for in the UK. And this is a kind of policy platform, but one thing would definitely be that career guidance, that those young people need access, not just now, but over the longer term, to career guidance to support them to manage this challenge. Another thing would be increasing opportunities for training. I think another thing would be incentives to employers to help them to focus on recruiting entry-level staff. And the fourth thing, I think, would be what we call intermediate labour markets, which is essentially short-term internships, which could help to sort of tide people over while we figure out how bad the damage from the labour market has been. So that might be things like the government offering paid voluntary work schemes, or engagement in sort of various sort of public works type things. Basically 3-6 month internships to give those young people something that preserves their employability, keeps them in the labour market while we figure out how bad the sort of wider economic damage is. So there's those kind of things. In terms of individually working with young people, I think we have to be honest with people that, and it comes back to that point of we can't always promise people a better life. And so we have to say to people, look, you've got to try as hard as you can. Don't give up. Of course, don't give up. There are still going to be many opportunities, but there are going to be less than there were. And in that case, we have to start getting people to think about, how am I going to spend my time in a purposeful way if I'm not in paid work? Am I going to do more study? Am I going to get involved in a voluntary project? Am I going to do something in my community? So we try and encourage people to think about this not as just a kind of disaster, but also as some kind of opportunity, but without trying to pretend that they can have whatever they want, I think. And so I think it's going to be very difficult, but we're going to have to be working with young people in what are not ideal circumstances over the next few months and probably the next few years.
Thanks, Tristram. A point here. I wonder about the possible increase of mental health issues likely to arise from this, and the impact of these folk gaining confidence to access the job market or plan for the future. I wonder if resources will be provided by governments. Any thoughts there?
I think that's absolutely right. And I suppose, and somebody else here, Claire, I think is using this term psychosocial considerations. And I think that's absolutely right. Is what we need to resist is the sort of pathologization of people who are depressed. Like, there is a global pandemic. I know a number of people who have died or have got very ill through this global pandemic. It is quite legitimate for me to be scared. It's quite legitimate for me to be upset, to be depressed. It's quite legitimate for me to be worried about my own future and the prospects that are out there for me. So that is not, that is about mental health, but we must be careful not to frame that as an illness. That is a, appropriate and logical response to the situation that we're in. And so, we need to give people support, and career guidance is one form of support that helps them to believe that they are not alone. But we also need to help people to reach out, to connect to their community. We need to help people to redefine what success is, to challenge some of the assumptions about what's normal in their life that may not be available to them. And I suppose I feel that we really need to go as far down those kind of routes of rethinking you know, what constitutes a good life, what constitutes a successful life, of supporting and building solidarity, rather than saying, as I think some people will be tempted to do, we've had a huge outbreak of mental health problems, you know, let's throw more drugs at people and view everybody as ill. I think we, you know, of course, I would expect those kind of the incidences of critical mental illness to increase, but we also need to try and recognise the social context that that's working in.
I think, Tristan, there was a little article put out by Trauma and Co. That was entitled "Normal Human Responses to a Global Pandemic That Do Not Need to Be Pathologized or Treated as Abnormal." And it lists a whole lot of things, right from kind of food and eating challenges and difficulties to kind of generalized fear, depression, anxiety, sense of loss of control, feelings of anger, feeling exhausted, immune system depleted, other illnesses, etc. And it was just a little wee kind of one pager, but I thought it really highlights exactly what you're talking about in terms of whatever people are currently experiencing, it's a natural response to an abnormal situation. And while some of these things can indicate mental ill health, in times of a pandemic, we don't need to treat that stuff as abnormal or pathologize it at all.
Yeah, I totally. I'd really, if you could send me that article, I'd be really interested in it, because I think this is one of the things that we need to be very careful about, and part of that is about this sort of thing of applying the old rules to a new situation in a way that they don't work anymore, and that in a new situation, it's reasonable to think that people will behave in new ways.
Yeah.
Hi, Tristan. It's Heather here from CDANZ, and I'm quite interested in the idea of what a lot of people have been catastrophizing, but the idea of the opportunities, both in terms of people's building resilience, and also the idea that often we follow traditional career paths because that's the tried and true, and that there may be opportunities for people to follow other paths, and what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this is a period in which, you know, people's resilience is being built, isn't there? And I mean, I suppose one of the things that I think that career guidance and other forms of, well, any kind of helping intervention is designed to do is to help people to think that through and try and make sort of good decisions about what they're going to do about that. In that just having bad things happen to you doesn't necessarily build resilience, but, you know, thinking about how you respond to them and then also learning from those responses. And that's what we're trying to do, you know, amongst, I mean, many other professionals are trying to do that as well, but it's one of the things career guidance is trying to do. I think this thing about reframing what life is about is very interesting. And I mean, it just feels to me that this is this idea of the pedagogic moment, is that there is a time now when we're talking about what's important. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've definitely been doing it. We've been talking about it collectively. So in my workplace, we've been saying, you know, do we want to run as many events? You know, we used to run loads of events, bring people, you know, do we want to do more webinars? Do we all need to be in the office quite so much? Do we even need an office? There's those kinds of discussions. And then individually, you know, I think, well, I spend my time going all over the world, doing all these talks and things. Is that really how I want to spend my time? So to me, that is that's the pedagogic moment. Obviously, there's also this thing of, well, some professions that existed before may disappear. New professions may emerge. But that to me is what career, I mean, this is all stuff for career guidance, but none of it really works unless you can find a space to bring people into those discussions. And that's where I think we're often lacking at the moment, is that people are thinking this stuff, but unless they find a more formal way to think about it with somebody and to turn it into learning, there's a danger that it will be lost. As you know, as normal reasserts itself, they'll just adapt back to that, and then they'll think about those things. So I think if it's going to be a purposeful thing, it needs to, people need a space in which to think that through, and so that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important for us to be kind of saying, life is not on hold, your career is not on hold, your career is progressing even while you're locked down, and it's certainly going to progress afterwards, and you need to spend time thinking about it.
Totally agree.
Thanks. We've got a comment over here in the chat. A part of those discussions will involve how can I best manage my career with the new landscape and using what opportunities might be present, and where is meaningful work now? I think you've spoken a little bit to that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that comment.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, so a lot of university careers, I've been working quite a lot with university careers advisors, and they're very worried about their graduates. The question they keep asking me, because I've been doing sort of work on the labour market, is where are the opportunities? And the honest truth is that at the moment there really aren't very many. I mean, you look at the number of occupations where there is growth in jobs at the moment. I mean, there's some things like we've had a lot of this panic buying over here, so there's a whole load of people advertising for kind of like supermarket retail workers. There's some, you know, there's an increase in the amount of deliveries that are going on because people aren't going out to the shops, so there's a few jobs there. Depressingly, there's also a lot more jobs in healthcare, care work, and in undertaking as well as another area that we can see a growth in occupations. But most of the economy at the moment, there are not kind of huge new opportunities. Now, obviously, I think depending on how things develop, there will be new opportunities, because if, for example, we fly less, which is one possibility, then people will spend their money on something else, and that will grow other areas of the economy. I mean, that's why attending to the labour market is such an important part of what careers practice does. One of the problems at the moment is that a lot of the tools that we're used to as you know, labour market information aren't, you know, they're not keeping up with the situation. So we have information about the labour market that's often months out of date, and in a period like now, that is really a problem. So I think one of the things I would say as a careers professional is that you now, more than ever, is a time when you need to focus on what's going on in the labour market and trying to find out what signals are going on for the labour market. Because if you are going to advise people about where there might be growth, about where there might be opportunities, you really need to understand what's going on in the labour market. And you need to be able to offer them that bigger context, which is, you know, not just, oh, well, there is one occupation which is growing. You also need to say, well, look, no, the economy is in recession, and we need to be talking about those things, the big economic issues, with our clients, because if we don't do that, we responsibilize them and we say, it's just you because you're not good enough, it's not your fault, it's your fault, when in fact, they're dealing with a global economic, you know, slowdown, and everybody's going to find it difficult. And so I think that idea of being aware and tuned into the labour market and then talking to people very overtly about it is really critical to what we're doing at the moment in terms of helping people.
The interesting thing, Tricia, and I work for university, is that we're finding at the moment, because of the way that our cycle of graduations are, our graduate roles, which would be starting in March 2021, that are being advertised now, they're still recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the bits of my work, is working a lot with graduate employers and with university career services. And, you know, recruitment is going on, and that is true anyway. I mean, if you think about what we're talking about, a catastrophic economic situation is like a 10% drop in the economy. I mean, that's catastrophic, but it still means that it's only a 10% drop. There's still going to be, most people are still going to be working. There will still be jobs. Many firms will still be advertising and looking for people. And that can be, I think, a tension. And that's another area where us understanding the labour market can be useful, is that, you know, because young people will pick up on this and they'll come in and say, well, look, there's just no jobs. There's nothing for me. And our job is to say, well, no, there is something for you. Of course, it is more difficult at the moment, but it doesn't mean there are no jobs. There are still going to be thousands or tens of thousands of jobs available. And so, yeah, we need to kind of, we also need to be careful about the you know, the kind of messages that we send out and how we help people also. I suppose that's one of the things that I think career guidance professionals should really be doing. It fits with a lot of things I talked about in our 5 signposts, which is building the capacity of individuals to understand and read the labour market and these kind of economic mumbo jumbo that comes at them from the papers. They need to be able to understand that and make sense of it in a way that's meaningful to their life. And that's part of our job, I think.
Thank you. There's a bit of a side chat going on about whether IT is a growth area or not. I'm not sure if we need to comment on that. There is also a question about, with an ageing workforce, should there be pressure to open up positions over to young people, prioritise the young people?
I mean, like, I hope not. I mean, I think, I mean, and again, it comes back to this thing that the sort of restructuring of vulnerability that goes on, the restructuring of oppression and so on, is if this is used as a way to say, well, look, some people shouldn't be allowed to work, it's selfish of them to want to work, then I think, you know, I think that is oppression, and that's something we should call out and challenge, really. So I'm very skeptical of it. I mean, obviously, I believe very much that career is a lifelong activity, and that career guidance should support people throughout life, including in a period after which they've ceased to do paid work. Having said that, I'm very involved with young people and with the support, and I'm very worried at the moment about the transition of young people into the labour market. But that, you know, I would really resist solutions that say, well, look, everybody over 60 shouldn't be working so that it makes room for young people. I don't think that the labour market works like that. People, you know, older people have different skills, you know, it needs more careful management. And it certainly isn't possible to just take out a group of older people and say, well, that will make opportunities for young people. It won't necessarily.
Yeah, if I could just pop something in there as well, because it's a subject very dear to my heart. I'm on a steering committee for the ageing workforce, which is kind of cross-ministry and cross-industry. In June 2018, there was a white paper released that talks very much about who's working past 65 and why. It deeply concerns me that and I totally agree with you, Tristram, that there are a lot of, I think it's something like 40% of over 65s work, and a third of those is actually because they have to, because they have mortgages and they have people to keep. I don't think, I'm not that far away from there, and I'd be pretty annoyed if I still had a mortgage and someone said, sorry, we're giving you a job to a 20-year-old. It could be a 20-year-old in my house because I had kids as an older adult. So if you took it to that degree, you can take my job and give it to my child. Yeah, it's a very fraught subject, and it's really important that we appreciate that actually a lot of over 65s are a very important part of our workforce, because they add to the wisdom and the diversity that we badly need.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, if you're serious about sort of these kind of generational justice things, which are, you know, they are real issues. I mean, I don't know about in New Zealand, but certainly in the UK, the generation who are younger than me, so the people who are in their 20s and 30s now, I've had a hard run. They graduated in that period after 2008. They've had a hard time, and absolutely, I think they deserve more. But if you're serious about helping them in the labour market, then you need to do things like mentoring, intergenerational sort of solidarity and transfer of knowledge, these kinds of things. You don't just clear out older workers and say, well, there you go, there are all the jobs. That's not going to work, I don't think.
I have another question, if I'm allowed, Lauren. Can I be allowed another question? I'm going to say yes because she hasn't said anything.
Sorry, I was just going to say we are right on an hour. I'm sure we can fit your question in, Jenny, but I've got 2 more in the chat as well. Have you got a bit longer, Tristram?
Shall I take, do you want to take that question, all 3 of them, and then I'll come back and sort of wrap up at the end? How does that sound?
Sure. Yeah, those last
Yeah.
3 questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shall I
Jenny?
go or shall I wait?
So you go do your one,
Okay.
and then I'll read these ones.
My one is about us as career professionals. There is a lot of work being done to support the vulnerable and the displaced at the moment by a lot of people who are contracted who aren't necessarily careers professionals. And I'm sure that you come across this in the UK and other countries. So how important do you feel it is in this particular time of pressure and change that the people supporting this vulnerable group have career development skills versus pure job placement and recruitment skills?
Yep. Should we take all 3 together?
Yes, so the next one we have, is it likely in your opinion that new political philosophies could evolve with global warming and the pandemic? We've seen some benefit already of less planes and cars, for example, in terms of reduced air pollution. And then our last one, can Tristram enlarge on the creation of space for career conversations to take place, particularly the acceptability of facilitated conversation in the electronic public space? 3 quite different questions.
Oh, okay. Yes, sure. Yeah. So I think the first one and the last one kind of fit together, because to me what they're about is that's about professionalism, and it's about what I think careers work is it's a kind of, it's a complex set of different techniques, largely sort of learning and pedagogic techniques, which are about helping people to think through their lives and their futures. And that is not about placing people in jobs. I mean, obviously the ability to connect to the labour market is an important part of it. There's no doubt about that. And I think it's important that careers professionals have some understanding of what employers are thinking and doing, absolutely. But placing people into jobs is not the kind of core of what we're about, really. So yeah, I absolutely agree that and that's about building our professionalism, and trying to help people to understand that what we do is not just placement, it is broader. It is about learning, it's about building skills, it's about dealing with some of these psychosocial issues that we've been talking about today. So I think that's about making a strong argument for our profession. One of the places in which we need to do that is in this idea of the digital professional, I think, is being able to show to people that we are not just somebody in a school or somebody in a in a kind of interview room, but actually when needed, we can adjust our practice and we can move it into different environments. And the digital is only one. I mean, there are other environments. I mean, there's how do we work with people in the workplace, and how do we work with people in communities and in youth settings and so on. But the digital space is an important one, and at the moment it's really important. And how we do digital outreach into things like social media environments is really critical, but I think it's very important. And there are lots of complex things. I'm not going to try and get into the details of that now. The answer is not simply just stick yourself on TikTok and that's it, job done. But I have seen some really exciting digital outreach things that careers professionals have done, where they have gone out to people who haven't necessarily been looking for services and said, did you know you could get help with thinking about these things? And I think that can be quite important. So, but to me, that's part of this broader thing about thinking about ourselves as kind of sophisticated, multifaceted professionals, rather than just as kind of somebody who sits in one particular sector. And I think the training of career professionals has to address that. There's a big question. I can't really do it justice, but in terms of what will happen in terms of new political philosophies, I think absolutely. I think most importantly, what I've talked about most today is that I think the environment will shift. I think we're going to be in the political economy of the world is going to change as a result of this. How much and for how long and in what direction is not certain yet, but it will definitely change. And people will come up with new ways to try and deal with that. But I don't think they'll be kind of completely new. I think the exciting things that are happening now build on history, as they always have done, really. So if you think about the sort of thing that like Alexander Ocasio-Cortez is talking about in the States, about the Green New Deal and this sort of thing, it's a new idea. It brings in stuff around the environment and so on, but it also builds on a history of how we do politics, how you help people, what the role of the state is that comes from, in that case, the New Deal in the States in the 30s. You know, and we will definitely look back to previous periods. And so we'll look back to the 1930s about how did they deal with the recession. We'll look back to the 2010s, how did they deal with the recession? And we'll hopefully learn from all of those periods and find out new ways to do it and better ways to do it. But it won't be, I don't think we'll end up in kind of completely new situations. So just to wrap up, I mean, that's been a really interesting conversation, and please send me some thoughts. If you're interested in, if this sort of stuff resonates with you and you're interested in getting more involved, then just send me an email, and I'm trying to figure out how we get more people involved in the writing and contributing to this website. And yeah, but I suppose at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that the world, the world is changing. It's always changing, but the pandemic has really sped things up. However it changes, the idea that people want to build good, meaningful lives where they are able to provide for themselves and their families, but also make a kind of positive difference to the world. I think that's the given. That's part of the nature of being human. And really the work that we do in career guidance is absolutely rooted in that and helping people to achieve those aims. And so I think that's why we should see that in this time, our work is particularly important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tristram. We really, really appreciate you giving up your time and expertise for us. You've been a long time friend of CDANZ. I'm not sure if many of you know that Tristram came out as a guest of CDANZ and Careers New Zealand back in 2015, I think, Tristram. And has also been one of our World Tableau guests, as has Ronald Sultana. So really appreciate their conversation and their work. And I will have this recording, if it's all right with Tristram, up on our website along with all his links and how to get in touch with him and references to the books and the articles he's referred to. And you've still got your blog as well, Tristram, Adventures in Career Development.
Yep. So yeah, you can find me on my blog, which is Adventures in Career Development, or on the Career Guidance and Social Justice website. And yeah, please send me the links to this discussion, and I'll put it up on the Career Guidance and Social Justice website as well.
Okay, thank you, and lots of thanks coming through the chat, which I think you can see for yourself.
Yeah,
everyone thinks it's been a valuable conversation.
I'd say I'm on. If you search me, you'll find me. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and everything as well. So yeah, however people want to get in touch, then please do so.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all. With that, we'll wrap this up and we'll stay in touch. Thanks very much.
Thank you.